Welcome to our series of webinars presented by the bizsugar Mastermind community on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month at noon Central. So we are fortunate to have analytics expert Pierre Dubois to share how to get actionable data from Google Analytics. Pierre is the founder and CEO of Zamana Analytics, a small business digital analytics consultancy. CEO World Magazine recognized him as one of the leading experts on big data and analytics. I'm going to brief this down. He's a co-author of books. He's been a technical editor on Pearson Publications. He's contributed analytics material for Raymond Ray's book, The Facebook Guide to Small Business Marketing. And he's a regular contributor to many publishers, including Information Week, CMS Wire, Succeed as Your Own Boss, Pitney Bowes, Smart Essentials, lots of them. He's also been a Small Business Trends business book reviewer since 2009. He's been featured in the Chicago Sun-Times. He's contributed supporting material for articles on Open Forum, American Express, blockenterprise.com. He's a speaker and a presenter, and was presenter of the Google Get Your Business Online program. So he's really an expert, and I'm really happy to have you. Go ahead, Pierre.
Thank you, Gail. I'm always expecting Kermit the Frog to go, hey, across the screen, basically. So good afternoon. As Gail has mentioned, my name is Pierre Dubois. I'm the founder of Zamana Analytics. Thank you for joining us. I know that Google Analytics is a pretty tough subject to get through. And I have to admit, in putting these slides together, I also found that there was a ton of material that I wasn't able to incorporate into today's slides. So good news, not only will you get a replay of this, because it's recorded, I'm also planning to have another webinar very soon. I'm going to when we get done, I'll talk to Gail and see what's on the schedule. I'd like to try to do something with a little bit more with more features on reporting and some of the features within not only Data Studio, but also some things within R. And I'll get to that towards the end in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen through a PDF. Okay, so everyone should see my screen. You can? Okay, perfect. All right, great. And what I'm going to do is I'll tab back and forth over a couple of times. If there's questions or anything else, I'm kind of looking at the PDF here. That's probably the easiest way of doing this. So I'll get into what we'll talk about today. What we're going to talk about is, this is sort of an outline of what to expect with Google Analytics, and may sound a little bit technical, but to be quite frank with you, even if you are working with a developer, you'll at least walk away with some understanding of what should be set up and what goes into the reporting, at least a little bit. So we'll talk about setting up, planning the tags, and setting up with Google Tag Manager, a light review of the reporting within the Google navigation, and then a light review of a couple of features within Data Studio that will help you in terms of what you might want to look for if you're setting up some sort of reporting within Google Analytics. So what I'll do is, let's see here. I'm going to set my background since Gail has gone through that. I've been doing this now for about 13 years, which is a long time. And a lot of stuff currently with Google Analytics really is a reflection of changes in analytics in general. Google Analytics started as being mainly, and it still is to a certain extent, mainly as a analytics for websites, where if you load a page in a browser, you can get an idea of, assuming you can get some metrics ranging from how many pages are being loaded, how much time is being spent on a page. And those metrics became proxies for how people were engaging with content. What changed between 2009 and now 2022, besides the pandemic that we've been struggling with for the last 2 years, is the idea that Google Analytics there's a lot of different sources that you can have for how your customers are arriving at a website, and these days also arriving through with an app or some combination of the two. So basically what you want your metrics what you want to do with your analytics and planning is thinking about, again, what are the things that what is that customer journey is looking like, and what you can do to help get some ideas for measurement as well. Let's see here. So a lot of the evolving that has gone on for Google Analytics, or GA4 as it's currently called. I mentioned about how Google Analytics is supposed to be for page loading and measuring how many, how a page loads into the browser, and that would trigger a fire off the analytics tag. That's still true to an extent, but a lot of the metrics have a stronger focus on what's called event-based data reporting. And this is basically when someone comes to a web page, you probably are more interested in how they're interacting with content. And that can be a range of things, ranging from playing back a video, if they click on a button to play a video. It could be how someone scrolls down on the page to get to a certain portion of your web copy where you may have an offer for them to download a white paper. It could be the button for the white paper, basically. So you have those. So basically what Google has done with GA4 is to, they've done a lot of things in the interface, but it's basically about trying to focus on event-based reporting. And what that's done consequently is that it's also made some other changes about incorporating a better sense of consent. As you probably are well aware of, there's been changes over the last few years in terms of data privacy, trying to have more of a consent at the website, basically. Google has made some adjustments, and they're still probably going to make some more adjustments now. I know that over in Europe, there's a controversy that's going on now, but a lot of this is also allowing you to planning out your tags also allows you to plan out what would you do to indicate to your customers that you're going to protect their privacy. Another big change within GA4 is being able to make adjustments more in the user interface for Google Analytics. This is a big deal. Back in the old days, 2009, 2010, 2011, when you had to make a change with a tag, you literally had to pull down, in a lot of cases, you had to pull down a web page, make a hard code adjustment in the tag, and then load that page back up again. The problem with this is that it can be cumbersome. If you have developers who moved on, so you may have a technical debt in terms of who can actually do that. Google has made a number of changes that allows you to make a little bit more changes within Tag Manager and within and now within Google Analytics. So it's a little bit easier to make some changes. And then there's some features that, and won't get into this today, but there's some features that have also been positioned to incorporate a little bit more deep learning predictability in terms of predicting a trend, in terms of predicting a little bit more help in terms of what the data is showing you. We won't talk about that too much today, but that's something that they've had in some of the advanced features. So let's get into installing your analytics, which in a lot of cases can feel like you are basically putting an engine together in an automobile, but it doesn't have to be. Your first starting point really is kind of getting an assessment and organizing your content. And this is particularly important if you're launching a website or even if you had your website up for a while. Getting a sense of what your images are. I mentioned business news because a lot of times if you're in business for a while, content gets stale. We've had a pandemic that has plagued businesses for the last 2 years on top of just standard business where over time you might want to incorporate new news about your products and services or even recent wins or recent victories. So those things you may want to gather and update. I show a picture here of this is Greg Crook. He's a not only an old friend of mine, but he was one of my earliest clients back in 2009, 2010. He had passed. He's passed away about maybe 7 years ago, unfortunately. But before then, he had a beautiful story of how he had been in business as long as I have, for about 13 years, and he knew his website needed to be updated, but we found that he had pictures and all sorts of things that he just had not had a chance to put into his website. So we used analytics in the sense of using that moment to actually kind of gather and get those pieces together and come together and help tell his story better for his customers to understand that he's a musician, he has a studio, and he does a lot of professional work. One of the things, there's two other things you want to keep in mind as well too when you're checking. Think about accessibility. A lot of times you're making changes to the user interface on a website or web page. If you're making those sort of changes, that might be also a great time to check and think about maybe upgrading your analytics if you haven't. And then another thing you want to keep in mind is auditing where your ads are. And this is a good example here. This is one from Facebook where there was supposed to be $100 off on a sneaker, but the date on the ad was way later than when I actually saw it. So what you want to do is you definitely want to get some sense of your advertising, particularly if you're using social media, particularly if you're using digital ads, because a lot of that does tie into the analytics reporting. Watch my time here. So once you kind of get some ideas, you want to map out where your tags are going to go against your page and your app content. And what you want to do is note any sort of subdirectories that you're planning to do. And it sounds elaborate, but it doesn't have to be. It can be as elaborate as going onto a digital software and laying out your pages, or it could be as simple as you taking a piece of paper, mapping out your pages and identifying what goes on those pages and sitting down with your designer and developer and implementing. And the things that you want to think about is, what are the actions that you want to track? Do you want to track someone downloading a white paper? Do you want to track someone, let's just say, or identify when somebody plays a video on your web page? These will be events, basically. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. And then you want to think about what additional data is desired. And these are variables. And these are things that maybe, as an example would be, as an e-commerce site, maybe more products and services that you are beginning to offer, or you want to have identified when people are purchasing online. Putting these in these terms helps not only in how you work with a developer, but also helps in terms of how you want to label things later on when you get into the tag manager in particular. And you may want to also think about any interstitial media, and this is media that fires that should fire a tag before the page completely loads, and that dictates a lot of that dictates what you want to check on in terms of how you want your tags to how you want your main tag to function in comparison to your web page or site. And then from there, you want to start thinking about creating a container for tag manager, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the type of things that you want to think about, or the types of events that you can think about, and I talked a little bit about some of this. Page view is pretty standard. You know, whether a page understanding page views as a metric can still help you if you know that page is dedicated to a particular type of content. Page scrolling is possible. You can actually see or measure if someone is scrolling down to a certain part of a page, and that can help you if people are starting off at maybe something in a header piece of your page and then scrolling down to something a little bit that might be really what you want them to take a look at, or see if they do that on some occasion. I mentioned about clicks. Again, clicking on an internal and external links could be possible. And external links could be in terms of even if you're tagging something on a piece of content to be shared through social media, that is something that you want to have identified and mapped out. Site search, we'll talk a little bit about that later on, but it's the idea that if somebody's coming to your website to search for content, you may want to have some reporting to identify what type of content is generally being searched for. That can be helpful if you're if you are producing a blog, trying to come up with ideas of what is it that people are overlooking or missing in the content that they would like to see. So that kind of gives you a clue. I mentioned about video plays and, of course, file downloads as well. So once we've mapped through some of this, we want to start thinking about administration to arrange the property settings within the analytics. And this is where you may want to think about, who are the account administrators. Now, Google over the last few years actually has done a better job than what they did way back in the beginning. If someone had the access to be an account administrator and if they left, basically you're SOL. In terms of whether or not you can get back into an account. There was kind of some confusion in there. But Google has made it a little bit easier several years ago to make it easier to have somebody who has an administrative, to switch between administrative versus reporting view. But you still may want to have to think about who is it that will go back into the reports on a regular basis, basically. And then you want to think about setting a filter, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then one thing you want to think about on here, and this has been changed in Google Analytics, and I'll be honest, I'm actually disappointed that this is taken out. There used to be an annotation feature in the reports. Annotation is just a way of, it's a mechanical, I wouldn't say mechanical, but it's a way of identifying or keeping a log of changes that you make on a website and keeping it in something associated within kind of a history, so that way you can kind of know what's been done before. When Google redesigned the reports, they eliminated the annotation feature, which I think is, I personally think that's a mistake. So you may want to think about how do you want to keep some sort of account change history? And there's a lot of different tools you can use for this, whether it's something as simple as Evernote, if you know that you're not technically inclined, or if you're running an app, you may want to consider looking at GitHub and looking at GitHub projects and keeping a history there. So that way you not only are looking at versions of an app, but versions of changes in your analytics, but maybe keeping up with versions of your app as well. So that's something you may want to keep in mind, is that at some point you may want to keep some change history just to kind of know when something's been changed, switched, updated, and kind of follow along. Okay. So one of the things you want to think about, if you are making a switch between old Google Analytics, which is the Universal Analytics, and to the new GA4, is that you can view accounts side by side to make that transition easier. There's a GA4 setup assistant to let you do that, basically. And this is just if you are making a transition that is that you want to keep certain reporting in place on the old, to make some sort of comparison between old and new, or make some sort of notes. That is possible as well. So this is also a good point to think about that if you have that within your setup. So a next point that you want to think about is thinking about IP filters. This is something that is a little bit more, it's not as important if you have just one website and you're kind of a small operation, but if you have people in different locations and you may want to filter out people who come to your website from a different location, and you may want to filter out that IP, that is still possible. Under property, data streams, then under web streams, and then under additional settings, there's a more tag settings where you can set up an IP filter. The one of the things that you typically want to do if you're doing sub is to keep an unfiltered account, and then maybe the account where you have the filters in place. And the reason that this is sort of an old school traditional thing, it's the idea that you want to keep something with unfiltered data available just as a baseline, just in case that you are running into problems. I can tell you offhand, I had one client where this wasn't an IP problem. It was actually a regular expression problem where the subdirectories were just off by a little bit, but they had 50 reports. And something I think, like, if I remember the number correctly, like 29 reports were not quite exactly, were off for a period. And it took a little bit of back and forth and auditing to get that done. So this falls under that category in terms of not only understanding your website layout, but maybe also understanding who will have access to the page, and if they are doing it through a different IP. You might want reporting where that IP is filtered out, so that way you can have the traffic from customers identified much more cleanly. So that's what this is for. Okay. Another, and as an extension of that thought, is referral exclusion. And this is basically if you know that there are other sites where traffic is coming from that you also do not want included within your traffic. So so you do have that option as well. That's been something that's been there for Google Analytics for a while. And I'll note that for right now. One quick note I'm going to make at the bottom is that there used to be a setting for identifying bots within Google Analytics, and it used to be literally a switch that you would just cut on in the admin section. That is no longer available within GA4. In fact, that's actually automatic. So they've actually included that back into it as well. So that's actually a good thing to know. But again, referral exclusion is basically if you know that there's other sites who may be partnering with you that you might not want that traffic identified that cleanly. Okay, I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay, all right. Let's get into Tag Manager for a moment. So where we are right now, we've done all this planning. Let's say that you identified your content. You've identified the layout of your website in terms of you have subdirectories, what do you have referral traffic, maybe IPs that you want to include or exclude. Tag Manager is where Tag Manager comes into play is that it makes it easier to add a container of just have one simple tag and then have an interface. Google Tag Manager is not unique to Google. You'll find a tag manager in just about any analytics platform. If I remember correctly, I know Adobe, for example, which is more advanced, has a tag manager as well. And this came about probably, we're not quite a decade, but definitely at least 7 years ago, if not more. And so in this case, what you want to think about is you want to get your Google Analytics account ID if you don't already have it, and you want to have it set for the GTAG JavaScript, which is a Google Analytics 4 tag if you can, or as I mentioned earlier, you can do a switch over if you're using Universal Analytics already. And so what you want to think about is what this does is that it allows you to have a container that you put on the actual website or in the actual app. And then you have tags, triggers, and layers according to the account and site. And we'll get into each one of these pieces so you kind of understand where they are. So let's talk container for a moment. Container is basically that main script that you would see on your website or app, basically. And a container can be useful if you have some custom HTML that you are intending to use alongside the analytics. A lot of times analytics scripts are, they may seem quote unquote simple, but they still have to work on a web page or app against maybe other scripts that you might have for other things, whether it's a pixel, which I'm not sure that's going to stick around as much as it used to, basically, but we'll see. It could be a pixel for social media, or it could be a tag that's added as part of your CRM. So you can have a container with maybe a custom HTML included that will account for that CRM as well. Now, for organizing, you might want to consider dating and labeling the containers. And again, this goes back to that annotation thinking in terms of putting a date when the container was being added to the website, maybe a label if you know that there's a very clean addition that you're making to your site. For example, building you're launching a website and you decide to have Nimble CRM as your new CRM for your operation. So you can actually have something that says, new site CRM in the name and have a date. But that's the idea with a container, something you can have that makes a marking point for installing the analytics. Then the next point is the tag. And this is the code snippet that works within the container. This is actually the collect and report. It's a tag that basically designed to have a collect and report on interactions on a page. And it's a convert. So this is basically just a simple tag that you add. And there's some variations to this if you have what's called a conversion linker. And this is for adding maybe other first-party data captures for things like ads or maybe for a landing page if you want something particular and custom. So that's what tag is for. A trigger gets more into, this associates with events, and you've heard me mention events a little bit earlier. Now remember, events are supposed to be representing the activity that you want on a page or within the app. And so you need to have listeners to be able to do that. And that's what trigger provides, is a listener for the events specified when the tags are fired. And this allows you to have some sort of, you can have some for page views, form submissions are a great example. You can have something maybe as a link to make a call automatically if they press a button, or send an email automatically. That's also a terrific example. Now you can have up to 50 triggers in here, which means when you're planning your website, you may want to think about how many events you're having on a page. There's no magic number I can think of off the bat. I'm sure somebody's probably got deeper studies than what I have, but you want to have a healthy balance between having someone come to a page to do something simple or straightforward or intuitive versus and there's so many triggers that you can have. You don't want to have too many where it's overwhelming and maybe too few where it's too useless. But you're allowed up to 50 triggers basically together within the container. Now, finally, the last bit here is variable. And this is a JavaScript term. Basically, it's an object that is meant to pass data to the GTM container for tags, triggers, and even another variable. Tells the tag manager where to catch dynamic values if there's dynamic values. That's if you have something like a dynamic, we won't get into it too deeply, but if you have a dynamic website or maybe some sort of sequence in firing a page, that comes into play. And there's several different types. There's some built-in associated with Google for Google Tag Manager that's supposed to work with Google Analytics in particular. And then there's custom variables that you can work with a developer if there's something you have a particular need. And each variable is supposed to persist as long as the visit session lasts. So this is basically you have events, triggers, you have tags, which captures which is supposed to be fired when the page is loaded in, triggers, which is associated with events. And now you need to put those events with some sort of variable, something that tells Google Analytics in the reporting what this dimension is supposed to be associated with, or what this event is supposed to be associated with. And that's where the variables come into play. Let's see here. So all of this goes into a data layer, and I won't get too deep into the data layers here. But data layer is basically, it's an object that passes, that takes all these variables and events that are partnered together and passes info through the data manager. And then what ends up happening is that the tag manager reads that data layer attributes and then fires analytics tags accordingly. And what this allows you to do is that allows your team to identify how your products and services are arranged in a key value pair. So what that means is that if you planned your website, particularly if you're e-commerce, you have a lot of things that you're trying to sell and identify. A data layer is useful for you in terms of planning out what is supposed to be matched up with each button that's maybe pressed for purchasing a men's houndstooth shirt or a women's stiletto shoes, basically. So this is something that you plan through also as well. And you probably would have identified that pretty well if you've already planned out your website. A data layer, I'll go through a couple of quick best practices. The data layer usually must appear above the GM Google Manager tag. If it's this is really much more if you're dealing with a lot of e-commerce, really, to be honest with you, but never below, because it's a sequence basically that it's looking for. Case sensitivity is always a big deal when you're dealing with anything with programming, so that's important. Variables should be included in quotes, and you want to maintain the same variable names across the pages. And so this gets into a little bit of annotation again. What you're trying to do is, if you've identified things in your website, identified the things that you're going to offer, if you know that you're offering a lot of products, services, or items that need to be tagged, having some idea of how that maps out is going to be really important. Let's touch upon consent for a moment here too. This is relatively new. There is a consent mode within the tags for user consent, and this is designed for visitor consent on page and after acceptance. So you have so you can have basically you have two sets of tags, and this is kind of in that same pairing that you get, a similar pairing that you would get with a data layer. So what you're doing is that you have one tag that's associated that fires when the page is loaded, and then that person should see some sort of banner and say, "Hey, I'm consenting to whether my data rights or privacy is on a page, and then there's a tag that fires for consent as well. And so what you should end up with at this point is something that if you have something with a data layer and consent mode, it should have something laid out with this sort of manner, basically. Again, this is something that if you're dealing with something very, very technical, you're just kind of like, hey, I'm trying to take care of other things in the business. This is something that you can walk through with the developer. And I think the key part of it is understanding what you want on your website, what you want in terms of content, and what's going on each page. Okay. I'm going to check through. I know we're getting at 12:30. No questions so far. Okay. All right. Okay. Couple last tidbits here, basically. Real quick, there is a Chrome debugger that's available that will help in terms of making sure that when you finally have had the Google Tag Manager installed on the website, you got the website loaded, there is a debugger that can kind of help you if there are any additional issues that may be cropping up, or check to make sure that what it does is that it's a plugin in Google Chrome, and then it allows you to go into the developer console to do a quick check. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind. But this is something you may want to have your developer go through, because a lot of the call out is really much more of a programming issue. And then there's also a what's called a GTM, a Google Tag Manager preview mode. I won't go through this too deeply, but I'll give you a summary of what this is. It's basically, let's say that you've launched your website, you've put the container on, and then let's say that you just find out that there's one more page that you got to add because you just decided that you want to, in addition to shoes, you're going to carry sweatsuits, for example, or sweaters. So you add your page, and now you may need to add a few more tags. Well, you can add there's a preview mode that lets you, kind of like a version control, that lets you basically see what your changes are and how it would look in Google Tag Manager before it's loaded into the actual page. Very convenient feature. It allows you to make some changes if you need to make changes, or be able to kind of see how or if you're not sure how certain tags should go. It allows you to experiment a little bit before you actually put the container on your website. So it's a version control that lets you branch off a little bit. If you ever used GitHub before, it's the same type of thinking that goes into it. Now, real quick, the next step is now that we've done a website, we've done Google Tag Manager, we now start to get into a little bit with campaigns and a little bit reporting. This one you probably are already familiar with if you're already tagging your, I'm going to assume that everyone here probably already tags their URLs within social media or within their digital ads. If not, please do so. But there is a quick trick. There is a tag builder, a URL builder that you can concatenate and add the URL tags. And these are just done to tell Google Analytics what type of campaigns are being run. So that way it appears in the reporting. But one of the things you can do is to actually take those tags, and you can, within the spreadsheet, you can concatenate the URL, the campaign name, the medium, and then the label, or you can add more if you like, and you can create sort of a concatenated version of this. This is an old trick that goes back like now about 10 years or so, but you can do that to help you maintain a sheet of campaigns. So if you know that you have a winter campaign with ads, or for social media that you use for certain parts of, let's say for certain blog content that deals with fall fashion, you can actually have a sheet within Excel or Google Sheets, I should say, where you can actually have those tags ready to go and ready to add those in and schedule appropriately. So that's something that you can do basically. Okay, how are we doing here? About 12:37. Okay, is everyone doing good so far? I'm going to assume there's a thumbs up. I'm going to imagine that there's a thumbs up.
Hey, Pierre, I just want to jump in. We do have some questions, but you have plenty of time and there is no hard cutoff. So just take your time and go ahead and share whatever you'd like.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. we'll jump into the reporting, and I promise I'll jump into the questions here. So, so making decisions from your reports. So now you're getting all this data. You're not sure how to best approach this. The biggest takeaway that you want to remember about any analytics that you do is you want to think of it as a scoreboard. I know we just had a great NFL playoff weekend. Some people were happy, some people weren't. But in that case, you were looking at a dimension and metric. Dimensions are always the things that are interesting, or the things that interest you, or the resources that you're interested in. And then metrics are always the score. So in football, dimension would be your sports team. Metric would be the actual score, basically. And so within Google Analytics, you have a couple of features. We'll get into how this is breaking down. There's kind of two parts of this, and then this is also where Data Studio comes into play. You can actually build some custom features into Google Data Studio. But the first part about first thing that you want to think about is you want to think about what a dashboard should look like for you. And what you want to think about is in Google Analytics, there used to be, and they still have reports, but what they've done is they put a stronger emphasis on cards. Where you can have concentrated information meant for ready answers for dimensions and metrics. That means that you, within your team, should have somebody that says, hey, I'm interested in these dimensions, these metrics from the data. Can we set up some cards that will make it easy for me to kind of check and see what's going on? And they should be thinking about this. To be honest with you, there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but I would think that if you're running the big marker for this is if you're running a digital campaign, that's going to increase the frequency. But if you are doing something like, let's say, blogging or trying to have content on a website as maybe as a publisher, you can go once a week and kind of see which pages people are arriving to, for example, and see the change week over week, and that probably would be much more helpful. Sometimes being too granular, you can end up with you can't see the trend as well as what it would be if you spread it out a little bit. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. So reporting segments, Google has stuck with the main 4 reporting segments, but they've been renamed basically. Acquisition, audience, conversions, and behavior are now known as consequently life cycle. Which again, but it still has the same purpose. You're looking at the sources of your site or app traffic, the users, which is for audience, and that's just basically trying to get an idea of what type of audience is coming to your site or coming to your app, or using your app, should say. The events, as I mentioned before, events are it's like, this is kind of, I wish they kind of kept the name conversions, frankly, but events, we mentioned about events as the activity on a web page. Conversions are the actual percent of visitors who are undertaking those events, basically, and so Google had named the events just to kind of quote unquote make it convenient. I still like conversions personally. And then you have Explore, which gets into it's a little bit more behavioral, which is like what content is being seen within the app and how people are navigating. So within Google Analytics, there used to be, and there still are, there's the reporting has been streamlined quite a bit. Within Google Analytics, you have a Explorer template, which is what you would see when you go into a report. So if I were to, I'm going to switch over for a moment. Give me 1 second here. Let's see here. Let's see. Can anyone see I have a Google Analytics example up. Can anyone see this page?
I see an Explorer template right now.
Okay, all right. Does it say, actually, does it say report snapshot?
Bar chart, scatter plot, and table for data interaction. So I don't think.
Okay, yeah. So it's not. It didn't switch over to the tab. Hang on. Let me. I'm going to. Let me do this. I'm going to stop share for a quick second. I'm going to reshare with the new tab. Give me 2 seconds here. Chrome tab. There we go. Okay. Okay, and we'll switch back to the slides in just a moment. So each one of these, what you have here basically is, scroll over here. So within life cycle, for example, let's post this up for just a second. Let's say that you want to look at acquisition overview. No, actually traffic acquisition. Let me scroll down here for a moment. Okay, this is a little bit better. So the reporting has changed a little bit, basically, where it's somewhat in the same format as was in the older. The major difference on this is that you have basically have two sets of menus. That's one part of it. But the other part of this is that they've simplified what you see here. There used to be a timeline that you could see all the way across. Instead, you still have the timeline, which is right here. And then you have but you also have another graph, also a second graph as well online. So that's kind of like the big change. It used to be just one graph at a time. And then at the bottom, you would normally have the annotation. Google, like I said, they got rid of the annotation, which drives me nuts. But the good part about this is that you can still make adjustments on what you can see here. So this is traffic acquisition. And some of these may be familiar to you if you use Google Analytics under the universal. You can see direct, Google, organic. So you're seeing here basically the source and the medium. And the medium will be organic, CPC, which is for paid. You get to see referral. There's a not set in here, which Google, that's kind of like Google's version of NA and A. And then you get several metrics across here. Basically, these have been adjusted over the years, but they're very similar to what you would normally see from Universal in terms of users, sessions. If I remember correctly, users should be unique, and then you have engaged sessions, basically, average engagement per time per session. Then as you scroll over to the right, the big difference also too is that you have conversions, and there used to be goals within Google Analytics, and they still sort of have it, but what they've done is that they've made a stronger focus on conversion activity rather than having you set a dollar value for goals, which is what the purpose of was in the older version of it. Now it's just more of a, as out of so many people that have visited a site, you have so many conversions. So out of an event count, if I remember this correctly here. So what you're looking at here is the out of all events, you're looking at 60,000 or so conversions basically on a direct. So the idea is that you have a way of kind of taking this and getting some idea of the amount of conversions, the amount of sessions that are being generated, and the amount of engagement and time on from traffic. There was one more I was going to show up on here too, real quickly. Page and screens. Let's see if that is where I wanted. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is also another as well too. Again, one of the best things with Google Analytics is that you can show where people are landing onto a page and giving a sense of whether if they are spending some time on that page. This also has unique user scrolls, which is new. I'll get to that in a moment. But the value of the time on a page is that if they're spending about a minute or two on a page, depending upon the type of content you have, that means that they are, if they're doing that consistently, let's say over 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, it's telling you that they're at least getting attracted to that page. And that can tell you a couple of things. I can tell you basically they may be attracted to that content. You can then look at those pages, look at the events around that page, and kind of make some determination. Are people coming to that page? Are they converting? Are they really, or if it's just session, or if it's just content to read, are they spending time there? Let me get back into the slides here for a moment. So hang on, I'm going to switch back. Give me 2 seconds here. And I will put my eyeglasses back on, I promise. Okay. All right. So what I showed you is basically from this calls Explorer template, but this is basically the reporting that's going on. There is another part on Google Analytics called Explorations. This used to be called Analysis Hub. I'm not sure why they changed the name, but they changed the name. In fact, they changed the name after I finished the article on this. But real quick, this allows you to do some deeper analysis, what's called path flow. Path flow is basically when you go on to you want to see if somebody is navigating from one page to another page to another page. A funnel analysis can help you in terms of, are people leaving out of the page, or are they converting maybe a little bit later on something else, basically. So this is basically, think of it as navigation beyond a particular page or particular section within your website as well. There's a template gallery that offers a number of choices for this. And it's basically broken into 3 different tabs. You have a variable tab, which ties into variable. And it's a little confusing because they actually allow you to select metrics underneath here, but that's okay. You have a tab setting, which basically allows you to select the type of graph or visualization that you want, whether it's a table, maybe a bar graph, or a line graph. And then exploration allows you to kind of basically see what the report can look like before it appears. So you would select your variable, select your tab, and then select how to see basically how it may look before selecting it and then saving it, basically. So it's a neat feature that Google has allow you to get a little bit more customization on visualizations. But there's more things you can do even beyond this when you use Data Studio, or in one example we'll get to for next time on our programming, you can actually export data as an API and you actually build your own visualizations, but that's a little bit more custom. Let's see how we're doing here. 12:49. I'm going to get through these a little quick. I don't want to get through the Data Studio part. Events, again, you can make changes I mentioned about making changes in the UI and the user interface. You can change which events should be fired. And Google allows you to do that within Google Analytics in particular. That's a real neat feature. Like I said earlier before, you used to have to pull down the page, change maybe something within the code, and then reload that. That's pretty much in the past. So there's a feature that allows you to do that for events as well. That actually feeds back into the tag manager. Cohort analysis, this is not brand new. They had this originally on UA, but again, you can use this to figure out if there's a cohort of visitors who are coming to your website. Now, there is a limit to this, 60 cohorts, and displays the top 15 dimensions, which means if you have a very complex site, there may be some limits in doing cohorts within Google Analytics, which means you might want to look at Data Studio or maybe an outside platform like, again, our programming, or maybe Supermetrics as well, which allows you to export into an Excel spreadsheet as well. And then site search, say the site search again is a way of setting up a query, basically setting up the using the site search within your website and capturing the queries that are going on to get a sense, are those queries happening on a regular basis for certain words within your site. That can give you some guidance if you are trying to figure out maybe if there's a product information that, or service information that customers are looking for consistently, or if you are a publisher, maybe topics or ideas that people are looking for. I can say from experience, I've had clients where we've used this a couple of times to kind of get some initial ideas on what they should be looking for their next publication, blog post, or even for a white paper, to be honest with you. Finally, I'm going to get into the Data Studio stuff here. Data Studio is basically is a separate platform, of course, from Google Analytics and from Tag Manager. Its purpose is to expand your visualization universe. It basically allows you to bring data from Google Analytics and from other platforms together. So you have a couple of layers that you can do here. There's some simple reporting you can do in Google Analytics, but Google has understood that as the world has expanded, so has the need for something else that allows for separate data and allow you to import. So that's what Data Studio is designed to do. 2 features I'll talk about in here. In just a sec, actually, there's a report gallery that allows you to create your own report or select something ready-made, basically. So there's a lot of different vendors that are actually coming up with different types of reports all the time. Now, the connection is very simple, basically. You're clicking on data source within Google Data Studio, and then you get to select the connector. In this case, you can connect Google Analytics. And as you can see here, there's also a Google Ads. There's also a BigQuery and a couple others as well that's built and baked in. Another one that would be very helpful to you is the connection with Google Search Console. The reason being is that you can use this to get some site impressions and URL impressions. When you use or create, what you want to do is create a report and choose Google Search Console as your data source. You get the chance to select the website and this is the website that would have been already in the Google Search Console account that you're linking to. You get two choices. There's site impression, which gives you the average site position per keyword. So that kind of gives you an idea of where your site is being competitive for certain keywords, which can help you organizing where you need to improve, where you want to set up maybe for digital ads, or maybe set up for your content. And then the other one is a URL impression, which gives you landing page information as well too, where people are generally landing on, which pages people are landing to if they come through a search. So that can be a great feature in organizing your search strategy when you're planning out your SEO or trying to refine your SEO a little bit further. Google Data Studio has a version history control, just like I mentioned earlier with Tag Manager as well. And Scheduler, of course, we can schedule to send emails of reports. I mentioned about linking connectors. I won't go through this too deeply, but because Firebase is on there as well as BigQuery, and I mentioned about Google Ads. And I've been mentioning about R programming as well too. There are, when we get to the next report workshop, I'll get into this a little bit more because you got other choices out here. The key driver for this is if you know that you need to have certain metrics and dimensions in a combination that's not available in the Google Analytics reporting, and B, if that request keeps coming up over and over again rather than ad hoc. If it's over and over again, that means that there's something that you need for a KPI. There's a lot of platforms now that will allow you to take the Google Analytics data out through the API and then build out another dashboard basically. And Google Data Studio is one of those that allows you to do it, but there's other ones out here. R programming is one of them as well. So all this in summary, identify what's the activity that's going into your website and app based on the content you have related to your business. Set your events to set your conversions. Set your variables in Google Tag Manager. Again, use that as a starting point to have some sort of discussions on how those things are going to get recorded and captured. And then when you get into the reporting, again, you have some options to look at Google Explorer and looking at the hubs a little bit to help build some reporting. And if you think that you see reporting that of dimensions of metrics that are coming up over and over again that's not in the Google Analytics, see if you can build it within Google Data Studio first. And if that's not an option, if that's not available, there's other options that will help you to build and import. That's my presentation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into the questions here a little bit. Let's see here. Hope everyone's still here. Let's see if I can see the questions. Let's see here. One of the frustrating things is when Google Analytics labels traffic as direct. What does this mean? Is there any way to make use of this data in identifying your customer journey? Good question. Direct data has always meant it's sort of like branded keywords. It's basically either someone has either bookmarked the website or they remember the URL from seeing it someplace. Now that someplace usually has meant something online, but that depending on what type of URL, let's say if you're a car dealer and your car dealer is called Car Wow, which I think is a real one, but I'm not sure. But let's say it's Car Wow, CARWOW.com. That's a very simple URL to remember. And let's say that you have it on billboards and you know those billboards are for the Chicago market, or maybe for maybe a certain segment of Chicago, you can use the fact that you have that URL driving people to the available or visible, maybe, and you can use the geographic reporting, which we didn't get into on this, but that's available. You can use that to map back and take a look and see if and answer the question, is making these ads available in a region driving people to come to your direct site. So direct has some value, basically. It just depends on what you're doing in your marketing campaign. There are some ways of adding referral traffic, which I didn't get into deeply, but we will cover that for the next one, I promise. But that's the short answer to that. Next one, can you talk about what Google Analytics means by lifetime value? How to use okay. I did not, I apologize, did not get into that as deeply. Lifetime value is, and Google has a calculation for it, but there's actually a more formal calculation for it. Basically, it's supposed to help you understand which segments are returning and making conversions on your site. That's very helpful if you're trying to figure out if you're getting more return sales from, let's say, people who are arriving through a mobile device, or more return sales if you're using geography, maybe people coming from one particular area where they're making more returns to your website or app and making a purchase. So that's the value of that. There's a little bit more to the calculation. I'm going to promise you we will cover that for the next webinar. So that's definite. Was Google Analytics cohort analysis? Cohort is basically taking it's a type of analysis where you're taking as an aggregate of visits or aggregate of customers and looking at using the dates, looking at recency to figure out if there's a segment of customers who are making conversions, who are constantly clicking on the on an ad, or constantly clicking on a website, or constantly coming to your app to use it. It's basically it's a type of cohort is a type of technique. Basically, it's Google has had it for a few years, but it's not Google specific. You can do a cohort analysis in R programming or in Python. You can do that for almost anything. If you look at the cohort, let's look at this real quick here. This chart that you see right here is what a cohort will look like. There's you usually will see a period across the top showing days of recency to a particular activity that you like. Let's say that you had a big sale, and now you're looking at maybe day 1 after that sale, day 2 after that sale, day 3 after that sale, and so forth. And then you're looking at users, which is along the left, and then you kind of have this breakout based off of a time period. And this is kind of where you can have I gotta go back and look and see if Google will let you customize that, basically. But you can select the in Google Analytics, you can select which dimensions that you want to or which which types of you can make some adjustments based off of the type of either device, maybe of particularly some subset up to a point. The only down point of this that kind of I struggle with is that when it makes results into it returns results, you're getting like the top 15 dimensions of something. That might be okay for a smaller site. If you are e-commerce and you have a lot of product, this might be a problem, which means you might want to export it and look at it within something like you can probably do I'm pretty sure you can do a cohort in Data Studio. I know you can do it in R programming and Python, where you don't have the limitations on there, basically. But it's a type of analysis, basically. So I hope I answered that question. Okay, let's see. Any other? I am looking very.
That was it. We've got to thank you for the answers. And I'd love for you to share what's the best way for people to reach you. I know you had a screen up that had your email and your website and your Twitter, I think it was. Is there any particular way that it's best for people to reach out to you?
They're welcome to contact me through the Twitter. Zamana Analytics is the Twitter handle. We are in the process of updating our website. So that's the next step as well. So that's why I'm sort of website and also a little bleary-eyed as I talk to you. LinkedIn is also great. This is the Zamana page, so you can follow that for articles. I've done a number of articles for CMS Wire, particularly on conversions. So I'll definitely reshare that there and on a Facebook page and on a Twitter. There's actually a replay on there as well too. We usually on the Twitter handle, you'll see some things also for our programming as well too there. And Gail, like I said, we'll have a part 2 set up for you guys very quickly. And thank you for being patient on this. It's a lot of material. I hope that is really valuable for you. And you are more than welcome to give me a call or reach out and just say, hey, Pierre, I have a quick question. So.
Super. I want to thank you so much for being here. And I'd like to invite everyone to view all of our webinars. They are presented by the bizsugar Mastermind community on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month at noon Central. And you can find all the replays and soon to this one as well on the blog at blog.bizsugar.com/webinars. There is a tab at the top. You can just click on the webinars tab, and they're now prioritized by category. And so like you can click on SEO and see all the SEO related ones. There'll be an analytics category to find these. And so I invite everyone to go check them out. We really do have the very best experts presenting their information and for you to reach out to or hire if you'd rather pay someone. Personally, analytics gets so complicated that even though I've been in computers since 1977, I would hire someone to do it for me rather than trying to do it myself, even though I'm a technical person. All right, so thank you so much, Pierre. Thank you, everyone. We will see you again on the next one in a couple weeks.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye, and be safe.